Yeah, happy Mardi Gras. There's Patrick in the kitchen, Ramadan Mubarak. So it's great to be here. I really love this audience. And today we're talking about this over 10-year struggle we've had against and around automated license plate readers. You'll hear me say the word ALPR a lot of times. You'll also hear me say LPL a lot of times. And one is Lucy Parsons Labs, the organization, and ALPRs are automatic license plate readers. Okay, so I think I just want to start by saying that a lot of the work that is being presented is part of the work that we've done as an organization. It's not the result of Freddie Martinez's work or LPL's work. We've worked in coalitions with folks. We've worked with anonymous sources. We've worked with a lot of people who don't want their name on the headline, and so we are deeply indebted to them. And I know that we've Shai Hacknight's tried really hard to get Unravel to come and talk about some of their reporting. So that's just to say that we really owe a deep debt of gratitude. So if you hear me say the word we, I mean the collective royal we. I don't mean like I personally did a thing. There's a lot of people to thank. LPL is a very unique organization. A lot of us are researchers and sort of a mix of researchers, technologists, and activists. We try to grapple with the harms that technology creates in society and push them toward abolition. The reason we think it's important is that Chicago is a very important site for the development of new kinds of law enforcement experimentation and innovation. That sort of carceral technology is exported outwards, and then we see as a consequence of that, we see Chicago as a very important canary in the coal mine. So then how LPL intervenes is that we take our technical expertise as researchers and try to push the conversation into sort of the abolition of these technologies, because quite frankly, with some of these technologies, they're what I would argue is so harmful that there is no meaningful way to continue their use in their current form. And we'll talk about why that is in a second. I did want to say that from the beginning, if there's one thing we take away from tonight's conversation, is that I don't like this idea that tech is inevitable, that surveillance will continue its march. These decisions are political decisions made by people every single day. And just like people make decisions about surveilling us and how to deploy ALPRs or whatever it is that they're doing, we also have the ability to make those decisions ourselves. So one thing that really does bother us as a collective is this idea of tech fatalism, and we're very strongly opposed to that. There are a lot of vendors in this space for ALPRs. It's a very active space, it's a very growing space, and there's a lot of development that's happening. You hear stories of companies like Sound Thinking. They want to put ALPRs on drones so that when they detect a gunshot, that the drone will follow a car around and be able to solve a crime. I mean, like, this is the kind of thing that people are saying. Ring had a partnership that they say they canceled where Amazon wanted to collect all of your Ring footage and then give those license plates over to someone like Flock, and then they would be able to use that data. So it's a very active space, and there's a lot of vendors. And there's also like all of these things that people are saying, like, that's too creepy even for me. And like the Ring example, there had been talks about this happening before, and then it was canceled, and now they're restarting talks, and now it's canceled again. Axon, for example, wants to take the body cam footage for police and integrate some kind of license plate detection system into that. And so this is all a very active space, and it's a very growing space. And so there's a lot of vendors. I won't talk at like too long about them, but there's just a lot of them. Very quickly, how ALPRs work is you take an image or a video, which is just a collection of images. You cut the car, you cut again, and you take the license plate framing. You do you cut again, and you get some kind of character matching. Then each particular character gets matched to a a dictionary, ABC 1, 2, 3. You do this multiple times. You vote or aggregate the probabilities, and you say, okay, at the end of this, I think this license plate is ABC 1, 2, 3. We see like ALPRs being used in many applications. Things like congestion pricing in New York City, enforcement of uh, bus lanes in downtown Chicago, um, fares like we see them in like O'Hare parking lots to make sure you don't overstay your whatever you've paid for. So there's a wide range of applications for them. Um, but this is the general process. Um, I so what happens is you have license plates, and license plates are very uniform by state, territory, or colony of the U.S. In Illinois, 1956, the license plate was white and green because of Illinois Wesleyan University. Those were their colors. White and green also happened to be like city of Chicago and I think state of Illinois municipal like buses and police cars and stuff like that. To differentiate, you would maybe like if you're a computer or training a computer, you would also look for Illinois, land of Lincoln, but also 1956. And so you take enough of these license plates, and to give you a scale of how big this is, there are billions of license plates that are being scanned every year. And then these are being fed into machine learning and classification systems. And if you do this enough times, you can differentiate between white and green 1956 Illinois Wesleyan and a CTA bus, for example, from 2026 or whatever year we're in. I should also say that this entire process of like deciding like is this a 1956 license plate and am I going to group it in this category or that category is a application which machine learning is very well suited at. It's also an application that governments and states are very well suited at. It's this process called administrative legibility, where the people, the subjects, are divided into categories so that the state can classify them into categories that the state understands. Like another example of this is like gender markers on passports, right? We hear a lot of this kind of the state trying to force people into categories that have nothing to do with how people see themselves, but ways that the state can flatten them into how the state thinks we should exist. So this is the process of administrative legibility that was described by James C. Scott. And unfortunately, this is an application where machine learning algorithms and classification algorithms are very well suited. And I'm not saying that this is good by itself. I'm just saying that this application of computing is very well suited. And so we see that these kinds of applications are these are very hot tech products, let's put it that way, because it's easy to develop. You can take a project like OpenCV or YOLO V5, I think is the latest version. You can find them on GitHub, and you can have like a ALPR classification model running within the hour, connected to like a camera, and you could have that working. So these are not very sophisticated sort of technical innovations that these companies are doing, but what they do is they write software on top of that that gives them a lot of access. So this is a typical vendor. This is Flock, who you might have heard a lot about them in the last couple of years. And they have things like vehicle fingerprint searches, custom hot lists. And so what they do is they write software on top of the detections, the camera detectors, and then they sell that to operators. So some of the stuff that they do is the actual detection of the license plates. They create custom like heat lists, like I think this car is stolen. They send alerts. So a potentially stolen car went by this target, stop that car. Then they also can create other kinds of classification systems. They have one where it's this vehicle fingerprint search, where you can say, I'm looking for a blue Honda Civic with a ski rack that has a busted out tail section, fender, I guess they're called. And the police can say, like, I saw the last GPS potential match that I saw was yesterday, you know, in the West Loop. So that's like the car search feature. And so these things are getting very advanced. The software that's being written is getting very advanced. And then the data is sort of being sent everywhere. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. This technology is not limited to police departments. We see police departments, the mini police, like the HOA boards and condo boards and other kinds of like busybodies. We see schools deploying them, malls, gated communities. We also see them being used by like a DEA task force that is technically semi-federal, semi-state, city operated. And so there's all these operators, maybe like a bounty hunter, for example. And then they have access to all of these features. So there's not like a one-to-one relationship, but I will say that like this is really important that the operators are not just police departments. There's for Flock there's over 80,000 cameras operating across the country, and that doesn't happen with just police departments. Okay. Yes.
I just want to clarify, like, based on the system, you cannot enter or leave a town without.
Yes.
Like, and to me, that's very important. It's like the fact of the ALPRs are literally outside of like the perimeter.
Yeah. So
almost every town.
So the operators get to decide. Like, you'll notice in a lot of like shopping malls, they have these big surveillance towers that are. It's like the only thing that runs on solar power in the U.S. are these big, stupid surveillance cameras, right? And they get to decide. It's the shopping mall or the Target or whatever. Home Depot, for example, has ALPRs. And they get to decide where to place them. Towns themselves will decide, sometimes in explicitly racist ways, that in Detroit, for example, Ferndale, Michigan, they decided anyone south of 7 Mile, where it's all black people, has cameras pointed directly at them. And if you cross into Ferndale, you would automatically be picked up. And that was explicit, like one of their design choices. So the operators have all the control. And we'll talk about what control looks like in a second. Okay, so then there's like what's really hard to get a grasp on is the data sharing and contracting. So the operators have all sorts of contractual ways that they share data, and it happens a lot of different ways. One way is that by default they're opted into sharing data into broader networks. Sometimes the vendors will say, I'll give you a 10% cut or a 10% reduction in pricing if you share data with us. Sometimes they don't even know what the contracts that they're signing actually say. And then, so that's like the contracting side. There's this huge contractual obligation to share data. And then there's this secondary effect, which is like that the value of the ALPR network goes up as more and more people join the network. So in economics, there's this theory called network effects, like the phone system, for example, is a very good example of it. Two people having phones in their house, like landlines, doesn't help. But when everyone in your neighborhood has a landline, the value of a landline in your house goes way up because you have way more people to call. And you can see like these kinds of effects happening with ALPRs. And so you'll see what's happening is a lot of different sharing agreements that happen between particular operators. And, then it becomes these very complicated sort of networks of networks. And so trying to get a grasp on like what is Chicago doing with ALPRs is a question that is very difficult to answer. Are we terrified yet? Okay, the reason for that is that the data is the juice. Like the tech companies want the data. That's what they want. They want the ALPR scans, the videos. They are making their money selling and buying ALPR data. Um, Operators will typically do one of two things. They will sort of actively share data, like let's say um, Chicago Police Department will say, I'm sharing data with Cook County, the Cook County Sheriffs. This doesn't have to be both ways. It could be like one way. It could be reciprocal. And then there's this thing called that they call passive sharing, but that's a very big misnomer. So what could happen is that like Berwyn will share with the Cook County area, and now anyone in Berwyn anyone in Cook County has access to Berwyn's data, and vice versa because they pooled the data. Then there's also these state and national wide networks. The big pitch that like the vendors will say is, well, if your car gets stolen in Cleveland, it might end up in a chop shop in LA. So obviously, Cleveland needs to share data with LA. LAPD who's going to find your car. Anyone who's ever had their car stolen will tell you that they're not finding that car. You can also buy the data without buying the hardware. So you don't have to actually operate like a flock data system without and still have access to this entire network. So when I say that the data is the juice, that's really like what I'm getting at is that the data is what the companies are after, and the we're going to find your car is secondary to it. Okay, so just to give you an example, this is an older data sharing agreement from Elmhurst, Illinois. They were sharing with, this is just a screenshot, but they were sharing with all of these police departments. I don't know what the 17th Judicial Circuit Drug Task Force is, but I mean, it's amazing. I'm so glad Elmhurst, Illinois is sharing data with them because, right on. Alameda County in California, again, 21st Century Drug Task Force. There's a high intensity drug task force. This is what a HITA is, so some kind of drug enforcement. Out, inside of Illinois, outside of Illinois, who knows? I will also say that this network is a snapshot of the particular day from when we sent the public records request, so that these networks are not static. They change quite literally on the daily. So trying to get a sense of answering, what is an ALPR network? Who is the network, or who is my license plate being shared with? Good luck getting it's impossible to get an answer to that question. Okay. Then the networks that are sharing data with each other allow the software layer on top of it to do things like search for license plates or to send alerts, right? Like I gave that example, potentially stolen car went past the target. So now, the local business here will send the alert to the county police who will make the stop, or maybe it's the state police who makes the stop. I will say that these relationships are not. This is an example. These are not like. This is not like a specific example from Elmhurst Police. I'm just trying to give you an example that data can go from a business to a local police department to a county. The state police will share with the federal government, but maybe the federal government does no sharing with your city's ALPR vendor. It's a very complicated network, and I think it's important to talk about. This is like what I like to call obfuscation by design. If you don't really know what your network is doing, it's impossible to say what you're doing is violating, for example, the Illinois Trust Act, which explicitly prohibits this kind of, for example, the federal government accessing ALPR data for enforcement of abortion restrictions. Searches, again, very similar. Like I said, these are not specific patterns. This is just to be sort of illustrative and to sort of give an example. Is this sufficiently clear? Okay, cool. All right. So how do we do this work? We send a lot of FOIAs, a lot of public records requests. We also got back training manuals of different vendors. The one that we got back was reading this Flock data manual, and we were interested in Flock for lots of reasons. One of which is that they're a huge vendor; they're one of the largest in the space. But they also have this analytics and reporting, which allows police departments or operators to go in and see how, like in this case, police officers are searching the data. Who's searching it? What's the case number associated, if there's one at all? Um, Whatever. And so like whole hot list reports, event logs. And so, we started reading all of these manuals, we started digging, and we said, okay, well, if a police department has access to a network log or a network audit, maybe we can send a few FOIA requests and Freedom of Information Act requests and learn what do those network logs actually show. We're with me on this? Okay. So we sent a lot of FOIA requests. This was 2 years of effort. Someone in the chat that's following at home will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think over 2 years. Like I said, we've been following the growth of ALPRs for over a decade, but really it was after the fall of Roe v. Wade that we were like, okay, we know that ALPR data will be used to track people coming into Illinois to access reproductive rights. Let's get ahead of that curve and see if we can prove that. And that's what ended up happening. But it took, like I said, 2 years. 2 years plus, and we're still kind of on the trail. So what did we find? Unsurprisingly, the ALPR networks are sending our data everywhere you can imagine in the most cartoonish kinds of ways imaginable, like monitoring of First Amendment protected activities. Border Patrol is doing what they call walled off stops, which is basically like they have your license plate, but like no reason to stop you, so they invent reasons to make that stop. So they're doing these very bizarre interpretations of the Fourth Amendment because of what the license plate readers are telling them. I think also we're fundamentally rewriting how we think about like our privacy in society in a way that the only reason we're doing it is because of there's some corporate profit in it. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to rewrite my society because there's a buck in it for Flock or for Amazon. The other thing is that we found that the Secretary of State, the people that like actually issue license plates, are themselves unable to get a sense or monitor how police, how federal agents are and other people are accessing this data. The other thing we learned is that we did find a lot of violations of the Illinois Trust Act, and attempting to enforce the Illinois Trust Act when you have a regime like I just described is an insurmountable task. Like, just I don't want to say get rid of the law, but like let's not kid ourselves that we think that this thing is helping. A few other things. The Illinois Secretary of State itself was giving away license plate readers to the same police departments that were allowing the Trust Act to be violated. And it's kind of an ironic thing because as we were seeing people in other parts of Illinois really trying to get their city governments to take these ALPRs down, one thing that the city managers or council members would say is, well, if it's so bad, why did the Secretary of State give us this money? And I think they have a right point, right? It's like the Secretary of State never said, whoops, we had that, we messed that up. So there's like no accountability in this space for a lot of the actors who are supposed to themselves be doing the oversight. And so the other thing that we heard a lot is I've attended a lot of city council meetings or watch them on like YouTube or whatever. And what we would hear is, yeah, those are pretty bad problems, but I don't know. That's like a Oak Park problem. That's not a Berwyn, Illinois problem. We trust our police. They wouldn't do that. And I would go, and I've been to 4 or 5 different cities now, where this is like such a recurring thing that and like Evanston is a great example. For years and years and years, um, was saying iterations of, well, we trust the Evanston police to not abuse ALPRs, and then one night just uh, woke up and unilaterally decided that the city no longer needed these things. Sent out a press release, and then within a week, the company just put the ALPRs back up. Just a very bizarre story. But anyway, that's just to say that in a lot of places that we visit, we see these kinds of arguments about how to rein in ALPRs. These kinds of arguments about keeping them pop up, and it's often the exact same talking point. It's very frustrating to try to give people information about how these are being actually used in practice, especially when you have actors like the Secretary of State who's sort of throwing money on the fire. I think I'm good on time. Yeah. Okay. A few other stories that we have worked on. The feds are absolutely tapping into this data for immigration enforcement. They are absolutely tapping into it for abortion acts to monitor people for abortion access, for trying to access abortion and other reproductive rights. We also see this extremely undemocratic push where the vendors themselves, now that their hands have been caught in the cookie jar, sort of want to get rid of any kind of transparency that allowed us to catch them in the first place, and basically want to remove the ability for anyone to do oversight ever. Oh, and also, we found out that the FBI is monitoring our FOIA requests through a FOIA request. So that's Flock, for example, when I talked about those network audits that you can pull, they wanted to remove the ability for police officers to put in case IDs, reasons for the search. They're telling police to. I mean, you should see some of the logs. I wish I should have probably put a photo in there. Searches reasons like include A or INV. Like this is too much information for Flock to keep for oversight purposes, and so police are just now going to not be able to access that. That means that the public has no way of knowing which police officers did the search, for what reason, when, what was the result of the search, which police department initiated the search. So when I'm talking about, for example, Texas did a search on a woman who they thought was in Illinois that they were investigating. The story seems to be that she had an abortion that her boyfriend didn't want her to get, and they were investigating her for a homicide investigation. Like this is this story. And so Flock said, well, you caught us doing that. Maybe you should just not keep the data that proves that story exists. And so again, we're talking about the very undemocratic nature of ALPRs. And then I think the other thing that I want to talk about very briefly is that we're also seeing a huge push to start linking ALPR data, GPS data, location data, all of the stuff that I kind of mentioned with other forms of data. So, for example, in Minneapolis, we're seeing Border Patrol agents taking photos of people's cars, and then they immediately can look up their license plate, but then they can also tap into other data sets like LexisNexis and other data brokers, and immediately find out where people live, their partners' names, people they share addresses with. And so Border Patrol will take a photo of a car and literally drive to that person's house who's monitoring them and say, hey, I know Jason lives here. I know that's your husband. You better cut that out. We don't want you following us around. And so the ability of doing this, of ALPR data with other forms of data is happening like right now, and it's happening at a very accelerated rate. Okay, so I think I've sufficiently scared the audience. So what can we do? The good news is that like there are a lot of people who are paying attention to this. Like on the way up here, no joke. I'm not even BSing. NPR had a thing about flock on the radio, and the cab driver and I actually started talking about it. So people are paying attention. There's Ben Jordan did a great YouTube video about flock, and it has millions of views. And like if you told me a decade ago that like a YouTube video about a surveillance camera would have gotten millions of views, I probably wouldn't have believed that. We see a lot of contracts cancellations happening. Evanston, Forest Park, Ferndale, Michigan, Denver, Colorado. So we see a lot of groups. There's a group called DFLOC National, which has like regional chapters that are working on. They have an app in the App Store, so you can like literally see like with Bluetooth, like is there a flock camera nearby, and or you can tag a camera. Yesterday I was in Diamond, Illinois, getting gas, and I turned to my right, getting on the highway, and there was a flock camera, and I was like, damn, I should have had the app on my phone. That's just to say that like all of these struggles are local struggles. People are getting activated. People are like realizing just how dangerous these things are, and really, you know, the fight in Evanston was a 2+ year fight. The fight in Ferndale was over a 2-year fight, and they won. And so I think we're seeing the brand of Flock and other kinds of vendors like them is becoming very toxic. And that's like not nothing. And actually, it's a pretty significant organizing thing. Okay, with that, I think I'll just say like, yeah. Again, just to reiterate that we're against tech fatalism. You know, I think part of the reason that we say this is because like we might have had this vision of like this is where we see ALPRs being used, but because of like the mix of research and activism and technical know-how that we have, we're kind of situated in a place where we can make interventions and hopefully influence other people to make other interventions. So that is my pitch. And so I guess my other thing is, so where do we go from here? That's my question.
Yeah.
Anyway?
Yeah. So I guess my biggest question, having had you go over like the list is, what keeps the police departments, shopping malls coming back to like like these tools at like even though the vibe is toxic? You mentioned like Emerson, for example, like contract was canceled, they're back up. Is there a reason why these organizations want to use these tools even though they're not good?
Before we just for the folks who are listening on the road, if we could like repeat the question.
Yes. So the question was, what keeps brands like, let's say they get off of Flock and they maybe don't want to. What prevents them from going to a different vendor? Actually, you know, one intervention that's really interesting to watch is that Axon knows that the Flock brand is toxic and is trying to push into those places like Ferndale that and are trying to say like, but we're not Flock, we're different, and so you know I was at a city council meeting recently there, and I was like, literally everything that you say you want and they were getting from Flock is all of the same problems just with a different brand. So that is like a definite place to keep a lot of attention on because we do see some people sort of trying to be like to sort of play, I don't know, like back cleanup or whatever. And so there isn't really anything to prevent people from just buying a different vendor. And in fact, we see some vendors that is their entire business strategy. Yes, I can't see your name tag. But
Ryan. So the ones that weren't canceled, was it like policymakers or was it some people who were like, we don't want Flock? How did it get canceled?
So the question was, how did these cancellations happen? It's hard to say. You know, in in Evanston, I know we have a few busy bees who have been, pushing the city council on it for a long time. And then the police chief woke up one day, had some intervention on the road to Damascus, and decided that you have to get rid of them. So that's hard to tell. In other places, I forget if it was Forest Park or Oak Park. I'm pretty sure it's Forest Park. What they've done is that I didn't talk about it at all very quickly, but what they did was that they sort of pulled back what the police could do with a particular thing. So there's all these problems with, for example, alerts or searches or any of these other tools that I didn't talk about, but you can make interventions where you say, okay, the police can't stop cars just because it's on a highway. So they need some other reason. And so what happened in that instance is that basically, as the restrictions on its use got tighter, then the police were like, I don't need this tool because it's not doing anything for me. And so then what sort of emerges is that this tool is only useful if you can violate the civil rights of people. And it's well, if I can't violate their civil rights, then I guess we won't need it. And so that was basically the pitch that happened in other places. So it's a mix. A lot of it, in Ferndale, was a lot of community pressure. So we've seen a lot of different interventions. And another one that I'll say is that many cases, the cities don't even know that the operators are using these things, and it's that very feature alone that once it becomes public, then they shut it down. So lots of different reasons. It's a great question. I don't know which intervention is more effective, but they all seem they've all. I've seen iterations of those all work. There was a question behind Ryan.
Our cities, it kind of goes like what you were saying of actually puts up the cameras and would the state or the federal government put up their own cameras in a city like Evanston? If Evanston got rid of them, right? Do they actually physically move the cameras? And then also, can another entity just go run?
Yeah. So the question was who's actually putting up the cameras? And is there a way to make an intervention there or prevent some? What prevents, let's say, the state of Illinois from putting up a camera in Evanston, for example? Well, it's so the private companies are the ones who put up the cameras. They usually get some kind of city permitting because not so much with the solar panels, but sometimes with others because they tie into the electrical or they tie into the 911 system. And so there is some kind of permitting process. We've seen, what I've seen is companies just leave the cameras up because it costs more. This is part of the proliferation of technology and sort of Moore's law, right? It's it's cheaper to leave the camera up and disabled than it would be to send a tech to go and get it, because again, the software is what's doing most of the work. So in Evanston, as far as I know, those cameras are still up. And what the city did was they wrapped the black garbage bags and duct tape around it. Okay. So is there something that prevents the state of the federal government from coming and putting their own? I do not know the answer to that question. That might be a legal question that I don't have the appropriate background in. But that's a great question. I don't know. Okay. There's a lot of hands. Let's go there. And it's white in the back, and here with that.
So going back on to the previous question, so what you spoke about was quite interesting. That certain police departments got rid of the cameras because their usage became lower just because Going into non-police work, for example, let's say one of the usages you mentioned was bus lane enforcement, right? That's an example of a non-law enforcement kind of use case of this that I think in general, if you were to go to like a city council, maybe who are like very pro public transit, you might be like, oh, this is a great thing that we're gonna have this kind of bus lane enforcement cameras. But I guess the issue is with a lot of these systems and kind of how a lot of these cameras came about in the first place is that they can be used for, let's say, oh, we need to find like stolen vehicles or we want to do bus lane enforcement. But their usages become they can be used for just far greater purposes. And so I guess the question is, should the advocacy be focused more on the elimination of the cameras themselves, or making sure that if these things are being implemented in certain use cases, that we're reducing the ability for them to be used for, let's say, like civil rights violations?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. The question about like, there are a lot of cases that are being sold to people for non-police interventions, like traffic enforcement, for example, or bus lane enforcement. I mean, like, personally, like, I'll give you the honest answer, and the honest answer to me is that like I'm an anarchist, and I always think about the violence of the state, and like whether or not it's a police officer or a meter person giving you a ticket, there's still this massive system of coercion that makes you not park there. So I think like that troubles me a lot. Like it does keep me up a little bit. I certainly think like if you were to ask me, like I'm in favor of things like congestion pricing as a theory. And like I've been to New York since they implemented it. It's amazing. I think part of the problem is that like I think we're kind of I think like what needs to happen is just an even more fundamental transformation of society. Like you shouldn't be able to physically get a car into a bus lane, or a lot of like bike transit folks talk about like the plastic bollards that are there that don't protect you at all. I mean, concrete, right? So I think it's hard to like to talk about like are there non-criminal interventions that like these things could be useful for without talking about like what actually works, and I think what actually works, I guess if you want to use that terminology, is like I guess the thinking around like, okay, let's put cement barriers and not bollards and stuff. So I think we need to be a little bit more creative into like the interventions we do want to see, as we do try to tackle other sort of non-carceral, like other issues in a non-carceral approach. It's a good question. It's one that I was thinking a lot about as I was preparing for this crowd, because I knew someone was going to ask that question. I feel like I don't quite have the answer yet. I think it is an important consideration, especially for those of us who do care about things like public transit and safe streets and stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, this is one that I do have to struggle with. Maybe it'll be like a good discussion during breakout.
Okay, I have one more thing. So, more specifically, on the advocacy, like what's next? When we're looking at where do you think the energy should really be focused on? Yeah. Should we be trying to remove these cameras, like just wholesale? Or do you think we should be trying to change policy so that those like kind of focused on, I guess, the praxis of now, right?
Yeah.
Should it be focused on the removal of the cameras, or should it be focused on the changing of like how they can be used on like policy?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think what should we focus on in the next year? I think we should focus on ripping them up, and I say that because, and I say that because what I've seen in the last 2 years has been a very rapid acceleration. That if a person like any of us can't answer the question of where's my data going, then the policymakers can't. And I think when you're facing such circumstances, the only logical solution is to just get rid of them. And I think this is my like political side talking, but I think that I think it's useful to us to start with abolition because I think we're gonna end up there as the answer anyway. So why don't we just cut to the chase? But that's my political point of view. Anyway, sorry, there was
So just a data question. From places where cameras were built and contracts canceled and such, what commonalities are what can be learned? Is it that communities are able to come together, their town halls, say cameras must go? Is it that police departments just not getting money for it? Like, what are the commonalities in places?
it's so what's common between all of these communities is a lot of people getting together and yelling at their city councilors for a lot of different reasons. And some of it is like I don't want this in my backyard. Some of it is like it's a waste of money. Some of it they all have their own reasons. But a lot of it is just people saying like we don't want this. And one thing that is kind of interesting from like these examples and like the DFLOP national space and some of the other coalitions that I've seen is that sometimes like I wake up, I didn't know Denver canceled their contract, but like you kind of we do the research and we put the data out there, and then sometimes you just wake up and you're like, hey, Freddie, do you want to go talk to the folks in Ferndale? And I'm like, yeah, sure, send me. And then and so what's interesting is like people are doing this work, but sometimes you don't even see the influence until like I'm in the DFLOP Discord server and I look and I'm like, oh, that's cool. That person's campaign won. But really, like, what wins is a lot of the go and yell at the city council or whatever it is. So how are we doing that time for questions?
We can do it for more.
Okay, you've been waiting for a while, and then in the room.
I'm concerned more about the, you did an allusion to this when you talked about the woman who's from Texas who came to get an abortion. That's a person. That's not a license plate. So what's that tied? Are all of the DMVs and states tied into this network?
Yeah.
So at least you can tell who owns the car, right? But then you tell who's driving the car. And I imagine that the speeding cameras, take pictures of the images of the people that are driving as well as the license plate. So I imagine there's some, benefit there for the agencies that are trying to track people. But
Sure. That's a great question.
How's that working?
What differentiates between a person and a license plate? So one thing that I didn't talk about and kind of alluded to it here is the searches and the querying is like the state of Illinois has this DMV lookup tool that bounty hunters and police departments and whoever have access to. It's a system called NLETS. You don't need to know that for any other reason, just that it exists. And they all talk to each other. And so, what's to say that this is a legitimate search versus an illegitimate search? That's a real hard thing to answer. But then, like, how do you know it's this person in this car traveling with this license plate? Well, I hate to say it, or at least preview what you might, or confirm what you might suspect, but there are systems that are trying to build people detection, or I last saw a white male with a blue Chevy in this area. Who's got a matching car in their area? And so, I think in that Texas case specifically, because it was like her ex-boyfriend who reported her and all of these other things, there was a lot more information because it was a personal, there's a personal connection in who was reporting the crime or whatever. That may not always be the case, and I think in the future we're going to be in a place where, I don't need to know that it's like, me or is it me driving my sister's car or is it my sister driving my sister's car? Oh, it doesn't matter because only one of us has long hair and the police can look it up. And that's a future that also is like, we're almost there. Okay, in
Yeah,
your back.
I'm glad to see you have EFF credits there. Electronic Frontier Foundation has been leading the charge in terms of this fight.
Yeah, we've shared a lot of information with them. They've been great. And they've also helped fill in some of the stuff that we didn't as well. Arun?
Yeah, maybe there's something I was wondering about the corporate connection on the data side. Is that there? Like, imagining that Palantir must be circling somewhere or somebody else.
So the venture capitalists that are fueling a lot of these like companies are, they're there. A lot of these companies, I anticipate want to be like the next Axon, Taser, Evidence.com, Bodycam. Axon, I think in particular, or Motorola, another one. Or like, we'll just buy our competition, that's another thing that I'm worried about. It's definitely a concern, and I wouldn't be surprised if that like slide I made of vendors really like became one image.
But if I understood properly, like the information exchange is like exclusively police departments or government bodies.
So then there are I didn't talk about this either. The data exchange. There are also other platforms that want to, let's say you have Flock and Axon, and you're not using Axon's ALPR. They'll merge the two data sets. And so there's like all of these other things all these other vendors that are trying to do like what they call real-time crime centers that sit on top of all of the vendors, so that you can like sort of abstract away the hardware. So it doesn't matter if you use Motorola or Flock, because you have another software layer on top of that. So that's like another aspect that we're sort of keeping an eye on. There's one company in particular. But these things are also happening at the same time. So there's a lot of moving pieces. Okay. How are we doing on time? I think
Okay.
let's do here and then in the classes. Kind of. Okay. And then of course we can talk right now.
First, also appreciate a really awesome presentation. Also appreciate the references to Berlin, which is where I'm from, and where State Council recently voted on whether to cancel the flag contract, and it ended up being a 4-4 split with the mayor voting against canceling it. And the council members who voted to keep it said, "Oh, we would have been okay eliminating it if there was another vendor ready to give us that." And after that, just several residents went out and spoke out against it. And Berwyn police came back and said, "Oh, don't worry, we turned off the sharing." So apparently there's like one bad button that you could turn off. But that was like literally the reason that we presented. So I guess my question is, like, I feel like here we're all very much have a clear understanding, right, of what the bad side is, or what why these are so bad. But Berwyn is a very pro-cop town, so is Cicero. This isn't even brought up in Cicero, and they're like far worse. That embraces surveillance, and people are okay with having their civil rights violated as long as maybe a camera will catch a car that has a kidnapped kid, even though that's in Berwyn. So, like, how do you? I guess, like, what are some of the key arguments that, in your experience, people that are very pro-surveillance have kind of really hit home?
It's interesting that you mentioned like Berwyn, because I did watch all those city council hearings. That was one of the data points about the talking points that we see, that we trust our police. It's hard because like this was the same week that CBP like just disappeared a woman who was on her way to buy groceries, and when you think about how CBP is finding, and it's through platforms like Flock. It's through like data sharing agreements. It's through like Nexus and whatever. It's hard for me to say like. It's hard for me to get someone to understand that like the way the speed by which the police can turn on you is terrifying, and it's just better to like give them fewer tools, because I think like the idea, like the talking point that I use that is not very popular, and it might not be very popular in this crowd, or maybe it won't, who knows, we're about to try it out, is that policing should be hard. If we really care about our civil rights and civil liberties, like I understand that like there are real like risks in the world when we go out, and I also realize that like I don't want police pulling over people just because the license plate showed like the computer told me to do and that's not a world I want to live in either. I don't know how to get people to believe us. One thing that I think is worth exploring is ask some city council members to go and ask for the data yourself, and go and do some oversight, because right now there's a lot of trust being placed on they said that they did X, Y, and Z, and I cannot tell you. I've sent thousands of FOIAs, or we as a collective have sent thousands of FOIAs. I can't tell you how many times we've caught people in like bold-faced lies, and once you pull the records. So maybe that might be like an intervention to try, is to really just ask those city council members to go and verify some facts. Okay, one more question, and then I know there was a lot of cans. I will be literally right here to answer questions.
Yeah. So I saw Ring up there. I was curious briefly about that. Just because I was thinking back to seeing a commercial during the Super Bowl about this feature where you can opt in, and if somebody loses their dog, like they'll find the dog.
You want to find my dog?
Everybody loves the little bit of everything I have with the dog. It's great. I'm curious about are people opting into this? You talk about this bigger death, right? Are we looking at like crowdsourcing, like people's digital cameras? Like, is this, are features like this, like Ring doorbells that are just going down my whole block? Is this what we're talking about?
Yeah. So Ring in particular was like, or Amazon in particular was like, we're going to start collecting ALPR data and I think selling it to Flock or something like that. And like the data, it just sits on their servers anyway. They have it, so why not, right? And so like when I saw that Super Bowl, and this is actually why they canceled this partnership with Flock, was because the Super Bowl commercial was like so creepy.
Yeah.
And they were like, maybe we should cancel the other next creepy thing we had planned. But they've done this before too. I think in 2020 they also before the like uprisings after the murder of George Floyd, they also had the same kind of plan. So, I think like vigilance is necessary. I think being realistic that I've worked at tech companies before. I can't tell you how many like hundreds of petabytes they were collecting a day or a month or whatever it is. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what the plan is, but I certainly can tell you that they have the data. They can sell it tomorrow, and there's really nothing that stops them from doing that, other than poorly executed Super Bowl commercial, which is kind of terrifying. Okay, I will be right here for more questions.
Okay, guys. Yeah.